Sunday. You shake hands, smile, ask how everyone's doing. You sing. You listen. There are moments during worship where something shifts, where it all feels like it means something. Then you drive home. You close the door, and the quiet feels different. Not like the end of a normal week, heavier than that. Because you just sat in a room full of people who believe the same things you believe, and you still came home with that feeling. Not alone because nobody texted, alone because nobody really understands what you're holding on to. And you know you shouldn't complain. Life is still moving. Work, bills, the kids, then work again. That cycle isn't bad. It's actually a blessing. But somewhere inside all of it, something is still missing. And it's been there longer than you want to admit. Scripture is full of people who loved God deeply and still sat exactly where you're sitting tonight. Not because their faith was weak, just because loneliness is part of what it means to be human and to be reaching for something bigger than yourself. Scripture never promised to take loneliness away. It promised something else. And that difference between what we expected and what God actually offers, that's what we're going to sit with tonight. There's a question a lot of people are afraid to ask out loud. If I have God, why am I still lonely? Why is that feeling still there? The feeling that nobody really understands what I'm living with. The answer isn't found in an explanation. It's found in the life of someone you wouldn't expect. David, not the David in paintings, the young man with a sling standing before Goliath, but David at the height of everything, king of Israel, an army, a palace, people around him constantly. By any measure, he had everything, not enough, everything. And he wrote this, "Look to my right and see, no one is concerned for me. I have no refuge, no one cares for my life." Psalm 142, verse 4. Not written in poverty, not in failure. Written by someone at the peak of everything, and still feeling invisible. You know that feeling? Not lonely because no one's around. Lonely because the people around you can't quite reach that part of you. They see you go to work, they see you smile, they see you holding things together. But what lives inside you, they don't know. Maybe you've never found the words for it yourself. That's not their fault, and it's not yours either. There are kinds of loneliness that the people around you simply can't touch. Not because they don't care, but because it lives somewhere too deep. A place where it's just you and God. David had an entire kingdom and still knew that place existed. In Hebrew, there's a word, yashid. It means only one, solitary. God used it when he spoke to Abraham about Isaac, your only son. And David used that same word in Psalm 22 to describe his own soul, the word reserved for an only child. He used it for himself, for the part of him no one else could reach. Then, Psalm 22, verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? That line didn't stay in the Old Testament. 1,000 years later, someone quoted it, on a cross, which means that prayer, that cry from the loneliest place David had ever been, God didn't let it go. He held on to it, held it long enough for his own son to use it at the moment it mattered most. David's loneliness wasn't forgotten, and neither is yours. But maybe you're thinking, David was a king. His situation was different. I'm just a regular person. I don't have a palace. I just have a long week, a pile of things to do, and this exhausted feeling I don't know how to explain to anyone. There's someone else in Scripture whose story starts exactly there. Elijah. Not Elijah in a moment of weakness or failure, but Elijah right after the greatest victory of his life. At that time, Israel was worshiping Baal, the god of King Ahab. The entire nation had turned its back on God. Elijah was the only one who dared to stand up and challenge it. He called for a test on Mount Carmel, 450 prophets of Baal on one side, him alone on the other. Whoever prayed and had fire come down from heaven to consume the offering. That was the real God. The prophets of Baal prayed from morning until evening. Nothing. Elijah prayed once. Fire came down and consumed the offering, the stones, even the water in the trench around it. The people fell on their faces and cried out, "The Lord, He is God." There was no greater day in his life than that one. And right after that, He ran into the desert, sat down under a juniper tree, and told God, "I've had enough. Take my life." You know that feeling at the end of a long week? Not one where everything went wrong, one where you actually got things done, held it together at work, took care of the family, handled everything that needed handling. Then the weekend comes, you sit down, and your body just gives out. Not because you failed, but because no matter how many people are around, there aren't many you can truly open up to. Not many who are close enough to really understand. And holding something heavy with no one who truly gets it, that's more exhausting than any job. Elijah wasn't weak. He had just carried too much for too long with no one beside him. Verse 10, "I am the only one left." He thought he was the last faithful one, the only one still believing, the only one still standing. God didn't argue with him. Didn't say, "Get up, there's work to do." Didn't preach. Didn't explain. He let Elijah sleep, then gave him food, then let him sleep again, then food again. An angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too great for you. Not be strong, not God has a plan. Just get up and eat. The road ahead is long." That's what God did first when Elijah was exhausted. No explanation, no lesson, just presence first. Enough food, enough rest. Then, when Elijah was ready to hear, God spoke. "There are 7,000 others. You were never the only one." What God did with Elijah wasn't remove the loneliness. It was to show up inside it first, and then slowly open up a different view. And maybe that's what's happening with you too. Not God being silent, but God doing the first thing first, sitting down, being there, before you have enough strength to see what you haven't been able to see yet. And if that still feels too abstract, if part of you is still wondering whether God actually understands what this feels like from the inside, there's one night in Scripture that answers that directly. Not because it's inspiring, but because it proves that God doesn't just know about loneliness from a distance. He lived inside it, literally, the night in Gethsemane. And the most important detail isn't Jesus' prayer. It's what he asked for before he prayed. He turned to his disciples and said, "Stay here and keep watch with me. Not pray for me, not stand guard. Just stay here. Keep watch with me." The Son of God, in the darkest moment of his life, wanted someone to sit beside him, not to say anything, just to be there. They fell asleep. First time. He came back, still asleep. Second time. Third time, the same. In that garden, Jesus knew exactly what you're living with. Not in some distant theological way. Literally, he wanted someone beside him, and there was no one. If you've ever sat in a crowded room and still felt invisible, he knows what that feels like from the inside. He was there. In Greek, the word for alone is monos, the same root as monastery, the place people retreat from the world to meet God. That's not a coincidence. Some of the loneliest moments turn out to be the closest moments to God. Not because loneliness is good, but because in loneliness, there's nothing else left to hold on to. Then on the cross, he quoted Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The circle closes. The words David wrote 1,000 years earlier. Jesus used them, not because he lacked words, but because he wanted you to know, the prayer from the loneliest place you've ever been. God has never once ignored it, from David to Jesus to you. Bonhoeffer, the theologian imprisoned, isolated from the community he had built, wrote that there are things you can only learn in solitude, things a crowd can never teach you, not because loneliness is good, but because sometimes it's the only place quiet enough to hear. You're not lonely because God is far away. Maybe you're exactly where he wants to meet you, the place where there's nothing else left to hold on to but him. David grew into who he was during the years he spent in the wilderness, not in the palace. Elijah heard God's voice not in fire or wind, but in a still small sound, after all the noise had passed. Jesus stepped into his ministry not from a crowd, but from 40 days in the desert. Loneliness isn't a gap that needs filling. Sometimes it's the season God uses to build something in you that can only be built when no one else is there. Back to that scene from the beginning. Sunday, drive home, close the door. That silence. The three people we just talked about, David, Elijah, Jesus, none of them were the same. One was a king, one was a prophet, one was the Son of God. Completely different circumstances. But all three had a moment where they sat with no one truly beside them and felt that weight. The same weight sitting with you tonight. And none of them were left there. I don't know what you're carrying tonight. Don't know where your loneliness is coming from. A relationship, work, the feeling that you're walking this faith out with no one alongside you. Everyone's version looks different. But that silence, that heaviness when you close the door, it's real. You're not imagining it. You're not weak. Your faith isn't broken. And I hope that after everything we've walked through tonight, you can sit with that silence for a moment without it feeling as frightening as it did before. Not because everything is resolved, not because tomorrow will look different, but because you know that place isn't empty. It never was. God didn't promise to fill loneliness with noise. He promised to be present in the quiet. And sometimes, that's something deeper than any answer could ever be.